Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining us today. And thanks also to anyone who's watching this later via the recording that will be posted. My name is Kelly Seaton. I'm part of the DCR Recreation Grants team as the Grants Program Planner, along with Crystal, who I'll let introduce herself now.
Thank you, Kelly. Yes, we're with the Virginia Department of Conservation Recreation and the Division of Planning and Recreation Resources. So I'm Crystal McKelvey. I'm the Recreation Grants Manager, primarily managing the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the Recreational Trails Program with Kelly's help. I'm the primary liaison between those federal entities and the subgrantees, and we're really excited about this new opportunity.
All right, so today we're here to talk about our new trail access grants opportunity. Today's agenda on the screen here, we'll go over an overview of the program, eligibility, both projects and entities, the schedule for this year, both the application process and schedule and reviews, and when grant awards will be announced. Some details on project administration for those projects that are selected and move forward. And then we'll do a walkthrough of the application where we'll provide some tips and hints for answering different questions. And we have listed Q&A here, but we'll stop multiple times throughout the presentation to answer any questions you may have. Now we'll both be monitoring the chat. So as you have questions, you're certainly welcome to enter them into the chat and we'll answer them as we go and bring those up as well and voice them for folks who may be joining on the phone. Now, information you heard me mention at the beginning, so this webinar is being recorded, so it will be posted. We ask that any of you to please mute yourselves when you're not speaking. Again, we'll open up for questions and you can unmute yourself if you wish to ask a question verbally. We can also, but definitely use the chat as you see fit. And we'll stop and make sure to address any questions that come up. All right, so overview of this program. So the purpose is to increase access to existing land and water trails for people with disabilities. Hopefully as we look forward, we're going to have a lot more of these accessible features available, but we know for a variety of reasons, there's a lot of trails out there that don't have as many accessible features as we'd like to have. The funding for this program comes from the Open Space Recreation and Conservation Fund, so that's also known as the Tax Checkoff Fund. You may have heard of this if you are a Virginia taxpayer and you're receiving a return and you've been presented with the option to donate all or a portion of your return to different funds and different fund sources. So this Open Space Recreation and Conservation Fund is one of those. So this program is being administered by DCR. There is no federal partner like there is for many of the other grant funds that we manage. Now, if you want more information on that Open Space Recreation and Conservation Fund, we do have a website, the website for it linked in the program manual that we have for this trail access grant opportunity. So on the recreation grants page of the DCR website, we have a short, I think it's 7-page manual for this program posted, and within there is the link for information on that tax checkoff fund. So from that fund, this year we have approximately $128,000 available for these grants. So it's not a ton of money, but we want to be able to use it to get some projects built, and so that's why this is a 100% reimbursement grant, so it can cover up to 100% of your eligible costs. The minimum funding request is $20,000, maximum $50,000. And so with the funding request range and the funds we have available, we are expecting to award 3 to 5 awards. Of course, will depend on the amounts of the awards that come in. On the screen here, I have listed potential distribution of those funds, kind of how different projects may be selected as tactile signage or audio description, trailhead project, water trail project, land trail project. So we present these just for kind of your information and to think about different types of projects. DCR would like to award one in each of these categories, but everything is going to be scored, together. So if the best high scoring projects come in and they're all trailhead projects, it is very likely that maybe only one category, such as trailhead project, would be funded. Some key provisions for this grant. So payments will be made on a reimbursement basis. So you will have to front the cost of whatever your project is, and then you'll receive reimbursement upon completion and site inspection of that project. You will have to follow the state and local environmental review and permitting requirements, which Crystal will get into in a little bit more details on that, but just to know that from the start here. I already mentioned that a post-site inspection would be required, so that will be completed. Crystal and I will be coming out and doing those site inspections before the reimbursement is sent out. So we'll have to pass that site inspection first. And then the agreements will be for 12 months from the date of everyone signing, which we'll go through the schedule in a little bit, but we'd be looking loosely at, around October of this year through October of next year will be the agreement length from which all of the work needs to be completed, and we'll do the site inspection and submit the reimbursement all within that time period. All right, eligibility here. So listed on the screen, local governments and recreation departments. So these can be associated with towns, cities, or counties, tribal governments, and recreation authorities. So you may be wondering why nonprofit organizations are ineligible, or state or federal agencies are eligible for some of the other grant opportunities that we have. And this is because a percentage of the contributions to that Virginia Open Space Recreation and Conservation Fund are designated that they have to be used for grants for local public bodies. So that's why we have these eligibilities at this time for this grant, because the funds we're using have come from that percentage of that fund. Now, a nonprofit organization, could be eligible if basically you're the behind the scenes partner with one of these local government entities. So if the local government entity is listed as the entity name, they're their primary contact to us, a nonprofit could be involved in that way. However, the eligible applicant needs to be who's listed on the application and who DCR will communicate directly with and have the agreement with. Eligible projects. So here are a few kind of provisions for eligible projects. So they do have to be on existing land or water trails that are open to the public, and they must be fee-free. So, and the idea here is that hopefully the greatest number of folks can access and use these features in your accessibility improvements. The right-of-way needs to be controlled by the applicant. So that can be through direct ownership or easement or lease. There is not a scoring preference or anything for the type of ownership, as long as it is secured. And the project needs to be a kind of shovel or purchase ready improvement or addition. And the idea behind that is, with the limited amount of funding we have available and the size of these awards, and also the kind of shorter agreement length compared to some of the other grant opportunities, we're really looking for things that are ready to get built or installed, purchased and put in within a short time frame and usable to the public. But the key here in bold, that provides greater access to the trail experience for people with disabilities. That's really the driving purpose of this grant, and will help determine any eligibility questions. So if you're unsure, definitely reach out to us on your project, and in that line there is what we'll look at. Does this project provide that, within the other eligibility provisions? And the final point there, that it does have to result in something, on the ground or water, usable feature or upgrade at the end of the grant. When we do that site inspection, we want something that's usable by the public by the end of the agreement period. So here's some examples of eligible projects. They are also listed in our short grant manual. Tactile wayfinding or interpretive signage, waysides with audio description or an audio described tour, different types of accessible watercraft launches, signage at trailheads that includes different access information, such as what the segment lengths are, what are the slopes of trail segments and the surface materials, different accessibility improvements to features that are on trailheads, such as the restrooms, parking, or picnic areas, cost to remove tread obstacles and reduce surface slopes, so maybe doing different reroute sections with the purpose of making the trail more accessible, and cost to create firm and stable tread surfaces. So this might be cost to bring in some imported surfacing for different sections of your trail, things like that. So these are a lot of potential projects. There definitely could be, things not listed here that certainly would meet the provisions that we have outlined. So if you are unsure, again, just reach out to us via email or phone call. Crystal and I are happy to discuss through and make sure if something doesn't quite fit into the examples that we've listed. So ineligible projects, first one, projects on sections of trails currently being built. And there's a few reasons for this. One is because under the ADA, projects under construction are kind of already required to meet the requirements to be accessible. So that's one reason. And then also because this grant is seeking to increase the trail experience for folks who may not be able to already access that trail. So it's an experience that's available for some right now, and we want to make it available to all or as many folks as possible. Another ineligible feature here, so replacement of existing accessible features that is because of either a lack of maintenance or because that feature has reached the end of the usable lifespan. So both that one and the next point here, cost to return a feature back to its condition at the time of construction or installation, with an example of repairing a deteriorated area of already existing asphalt. So the idea with both of those is that this is not a deferred maintenance or routine maintenance grant. This is really about providing a new experience for folks that was not available previously. And then administrative, engineering, and in-house labor costs. Those are ineligible due to the limited funding available and our desire to end with a usable feature or upgrade already installed. All right, so some resources for you in that grant manual, and I see it in the chat that Crystal just provided the link to where the manual is located on the DCR website under under the grants tab. So on page 5 of that manual, there's a one-page list of different accessibility resources. So those may be useful to you in planning your project and also completing your application. So there's a list that ranges everything from kind of the more cut and dry accessibility standards through different guidance and guidelines and best practices specifically for trails. Our schedule for this year, so the applications are open now. Grant round opened April 1st. Applications will be due via email by 4 p.m. on June 30th. So we still have about 2 months left in this open period. Definitely reach out to us if you have questions within that time period. We're happy to help. In July, the Recreation Grant staff, Crystal and I will review the applications and make sure everything that is submitted is eligible and complete. And then, so after that, late July, August, our internal DCR scoring committee will review the applications, recommend projects for funding. Late August, we're looking at contacting folks who are recommended for funding, and we'll also reach out to folks who are not recommended for funding at this time and prepare those grant awards with the goal of everything being signed by both parties by October. So that we'd look at that 12-month agreement period starting from that date, most likely October, when all the agreements are signed. So before we go on now, I see some questions have come through the chat that Crystal's been responding to. I want to stop and see if anybody has any questions on kind of the general overview of the program. Next, we will go into some project administration details, but we'll stop here. And maybe first, any folks have questions in the chat, go ahead and put them in, and then we can open up for folks to unmute themselves and ask on the phone.
Thank you, Kelly. I'll go ahead and read what has happened in the chat for anybody that's on the phone. We had first a question of, can this grant be used in conjunction with the Recreational Trails Program? That's a great question. An entity can submit applications for both of these opportunities that are currently open, but they actually must be for separate projects. So any projects on past or complete RTP funded trails are certainly eligible. And then also any trails that were not funded by RTP but are already, on the ground being used. So that key point of already existing trails is a big part of this. And then somebody did ask about yesterday's webinar for the Recreational Trails Program. It was recorded and we are just editing the video before we post it, but it will be posted soon, as well as a PDF of that presentation. We'll do the same for this also. Would anybody like to unmute if you're on the phone to ask any questions? All right, I think we can proceed. Okay, here's one. Repair of asphalt damaged by an event such as flooding. If the trail is no longer accessible, is there a way for it to be eligible? So primarily by accessible, we really are talking about accessibility for those with disabilities of different varieties. This sounds like it might be more appropriate for a recreational trails project, but we could certainly talk about this further. If perhaps that flooding made an accessibility feature, removed that or destroyed that, we could certainly, consider that as well. So happy to talk to you offline about that, Liz. All right, not seeing any other questions. We're going to go ahead and move along, and perhaps this will answer some of your questions you may have as well. So I'm going to cover the project administration, how we're going to proceed with this over the next year after we select the different projects for funding. Next slide, please. So once the committee goes through and scores all of the applications, we will be in contact with you if you were recommended for funding. We will ask if you, are still willing to proceed. We may or may not be able to, meet the full request, and so we'll have a discussion about that. Once those are contacted, we will also reach out to any of the applicants that were not selected to go over, some feedback and things as such, so that you know what to plan for. We will then release a project agreement between the grantee and DCR. This will need to be signed by both parties, and this will outline the scope of work, the reimbursement amount maximum, any reporting obligations, and other grant requirements. If you've done RTP or LWCF in the past, it will not be as comprehensive and long as those. So again, these are state funds. They're not connected to federal funds, but we do want to have an agreement from both parties up front. Please do not incur any reimbursable expenses for those components before the agreement is signed. And we plan for that agreement to be for a 12-month period from the date of both signatures. Next slide, please. So I want to discuss a bit about the environmental review and permitting needs on here. As I just said, this is not federal funding, so it's not necessary to do a full NEPA review. Hopefully that's some good news. So first, we want to say that the environmental review can be done at any time. You could be working on that now. You may have a project that you were already planning within your locality that happens to work for this grant opportunity. So if you've already completed the design and review, that would also be something to consider. First, we do recommend that you contact your local permitting office. They'll be able to point you in the right direction of what permits you might need and things that your locality require. There's a big difference between a water access project and a trail surface modification. So you can talk that out with them. And there are a few state requirements that, since this is funded through DCR, we do require. You will need to submit your project to the Division of Natural Heritage. Their review takes up to 30 days at the most, depending on the scope of work and their workload also. And we will provide you a link about that. It is in the manual as well. In the Q&A section, we've covered some of this. So again, if there are potential impacts to wetlands or state waters, such as with an accessible boat launch, please contact your local wetlands board. It may be necessary to do a joint permit application with the MRC. When this is complete, you can go back and forth with us and we'll make sure that everything needed is provided. Please submit those as we move forward. We'll review that prior to you moving forward into construction. Next slide, please. So then for the financial side, this is a match. This is a reimbursement, not match necessarily. This is a reimbursement program. So once the project is complete, please let us know and we'll schedule a site visit. And you can also submit the reimbursement documents at the time of when your components are completed. The reimbursement documentation we will need includes a signed cover sheet summarizing the work and work complete and a summary of all of the expenses. And then we will need a W-9 on file just to make sure that we have the correct remittance information and for our DCR finance team. And then we need that proof of purchase. So either an invoice or a receipt, possibly if you have a contractor on it, what their invoice is as well. And then the payment verification, it does need to show the payment was complete. So we need to see a cleared check, or if it was direct deposit, we can look at those database printouts. Next slide. So one of my favorite parts of our work is to do site inspections. I certainly enjoy getting to see the trails and meet with all of the subgrantees. So we'll come out, we'll schedule it at your convenience, and we will check if the as-built scope of work installed product was completed as agreed upon in that signed grant agreement. We'll make sure that the finished product meets the accessibility standards that we were also agreeing on. And does the surrounding site, the existing trail, the existing park, allow correct routes, access routes to those accessibility components? If there are any discrepancies, we don't expect this, but if there are, then we will definitely make comment and you will have the opportunity to correct any issues. We'll make at least 2 site inspections at the most, and then we don't expect this to happen, but we do have to have a caveat that if it is not completed to what the agreed upon components were, there's a possibility that the reimbursement will not be able to be paid and we'll have to redistribute the funds. We don't expect that to happen, but do have to say that as a warning. Next slide. And then for the project closeout, again, so once both the site inspection is done and the reimbursement documents are submitted to us, we'll go ahead and process all of that. DCR Finance will be helping, and they will send that reimbursement to the subgrantee entity either via check or direct deposit. And then we do hope to have photos of the completed project. Hopefully we can take photos ourselves at the site inspection, but you never know about the weather. I'll come out and hike and do whatever, rain or shine, but we'll just see if the weather cooperates. We'll use these photos for some of our publications with proper citations and as examples for folks that are trying to figure out how to make their site more accessible. Again, please refer to the manual. We have a comprehensive Q&A section that may assist with more information about the administration of these. So before we move on to the application process, we're going to pause. Are there any questions about what I just covered?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
When it comes to eligibility under this particular grant, I'm specifically looking at the agencies that are eligible to apply. In our case, I'm from the Mariners Museum and Park in Newport News, Virginia. We work closely with the city, but we also have a parks department that's responsible for kind of the maintenance of our 550 acres. In that case, my first question is, would we need to have the city apply on our behalf, or can we list them with a letter of support as a sponsoring agency? Because they technically don't have any ownership, but we do work with them on many projects.
That's a really good question. Thank you. Is the site fee-free, first of all?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
We are open 364 days to the public, free and open.
Right. Wonderful. So From the general description you provided, it does sound like, that this does serve, it's almost like a local recreation department, although not quite the same. So perhaps you could provide us a little more details in writing just to confirm, but it sounds like if you have a letter of understanding or MOU from the locality, then that should work. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Sure. And I just have a second part to that question. Sorry. I promise I won't ask any more. You mentioned that it is eligible for potential water trailways. We are reopening our boathouse. We're completing the infrastructure now, which means there will be new trailways this year for us. Does that mean that this would be eligible for something like a kayak launch to make this feasible and inclusive for our physically or mentally disabled users?
Yes, that's a great question also. So that is one type of eligible project indeed, is accessible watercraft launches. So I'm not sure about the boathouse, but I would need to kind of see a little bit more about that. But if it's a water trail, point A to point B, designated, then yes, absolutely, we are looking for accessible watercraft launch projects.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I don't see anything in the chat. Would anybody else like to unmute at this time? All right. Well, Kelly will go on to talk about the application process.
All right. Thanks, Crystal. Yeah, as we've already alluded to, now I'll just kind of walk through the application section by section, call out some different questions, and some tips and guidance for how to fill those out. So first, the application file. So it is available in the same location as that short grant manual is, the link that Crystal just provided in the chat box. So the application is a fillable PDF. So it does require, some type of platform to be able to use it. If you don't currently have that, there is a free version of Acrobat Reader available from Adobe. So the website is linked on the screen here. You can definitely do it through a search for using your search engine, and the slides will be posted to access that if you're interested in accessing it that way. In using that, you can attach pages using the Insert Pages feature of Reader or other PDF viewer softwares. And so we're asking for, there's a few attachments that we are asking for within the application. So you can attach those within the same existing file and submit one file that includes the form application and your attachments when you go ahead and submit that. The text boxes are set to auto size to fit. So if your entity name is longer than the box that says entity name, it'll shrink to be able to fit that. However, there are word limits for most of the questions. We do this to encourage you all to be concise. We also don't we don't want folks to spend too much time answering each individual question. So please keep within the stated word count limits. And then if for whatever reason you're unable to use this fillable PDF, just reach out to us via email that we'll have posted at the end and also listed on our website, or via phone, and we can work to get you an alternative format of this application. So the different sections of the application, I'm going to walk through them step by step. So I have them listed on the screen, but I'm not going to read through them. But I will go ahead and do that now. So first section, applicant information. This one's definitely, pretty straightforward, but entity. So that entity name does have to be the name of the eligible applicant listed. So in the case of, I know Crystal answered the previous question, about a specific circumstance, but so the entity, we do want that to be one of the eligible applicants with a contact name from them. And then if there's any kind of unique circumstances that your entity is not one of the eligible applicants, but you're working with one of them, please reach out to us so we can make sure everything's matches up correctly, but we do want the entity to be one of the eligible applicants. So mailing address, that would be the address that we could use to send if you elect to receive a paper check reimbursement, if we're going to send any documentation for the grant documents, that we can use that mailing address. Now, however, we will communicate primarily via email. That's our intention. If there's ever a point in which you need something printed, we can send you printed versions, but we'll do most communication via email or phone, as applicable to what the circumstance or situation is. So that in the email address, we also then hope you list a contact email of someone who is able to respond promptly, and can coordinate if there's any additional information needed on your end, or the additional signatures and things. Someone who can be available to respond to us and communicate with us as we work through this process. All right, section B, project details. The project title, so I've listed on the slide here, does not need to be anything fancy. You don't have to spend any time thinking of a catchy project title, just whatever the project is, what it is. The right of way, so for that, can I ask that anyone on the call please mute themselves? It looks like we got a couple of new callers and we're getting a little bit of feedback. All right, so I'm on question 11, right of way. This we just want to understand what the right of way status is. So there's not a scoring preference for whether the entity owns it or versus the trails under lease or agreement or some type of agreement, or easement, I'm sorry. But we do want to understand what that circumstance is, and then so we can understand how the length of any easement may match up with the usable lifespan of this element or feature that you're seeking to have funded, because there is a requirement and expectation that whatever is funded will be available to the public through its usable lifespan. For property address, this is question 12. We're hoping for an address that Crystal and I can use to visit the site when we do those site inspections. So, that may be the nearby trailhead or the place where we'd park to access the trail. So a way we can access it for that. And then latitude and longitude, that is where we'd want the exact location in decimal degrees for mapping purposes, not for our visiting purposes. In question 14, trail amenities. So in this question, we want to understand what's available on the site now. What are most trail users able to access and use and interact with, and what's available to help us better understand how the proposal that you're putting in for this grant may increase access to those existing amenities. So what things are there? Is there parking? Is there interpretive signage? Do people all go to this trail to go reach the scenic overlook that's at the end? We won't really know what the existing experience is like. All right, section C, project need. So the first question in this section, number 15, statement of need. This really is probably the most important question. I have it listed here because both in the scoring weight, it's very important. And this is kind of the crux of what this grant is about and why it's important. Like why is this accessibility improvement needed in your area is really key to this whole grant opportunity. So please put a lot of thought into that question and your answers there. The next question, 16, service area population. So this is, we're asking you to describe the folks that are already using the trail, likely users, with this accessibility improvement. So feel free to include citations of things such as demographic information or health information, any user counts or expected users that how that count could increase with this improvement. And the next question, 17, public involvement. This, we would like to understand any public involvement in any way in the project. So that can be, positively or in the negative sense of, have you received a complaint that is why you're working towards putting this project in. And that helps us understand of why this is needed and that there's a call for this project to be built. And this can also include if you've done any consultation or outreach to folks with disabilities or advocates for folks with disabilities in either the design of your project or selecting, if it's the case of you're kind of installing some as built item, have you consulted with anyone who helped you decide to have any folks with disabilities helped you decide what to actually put in and what the design is going to look like. All right, we are now on section D, standards and design. So the first question in that, question 18, is asking you to describe how this project either meets or exceeds the accessibility standards. So this can be most likely all of your entities fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, which, as many of you know, does not contain specific standards for things like trails and outdoor areas like watercraft launches. However, the ABA, the Architectural Barriers Act, does have outdoor standards that follow those. So most likely your entity may be technically exempt from, say, following those standards, but they are still the best practice guidelines for how you can make that experience accessible. So if you're following those, we want to know about it. Just explain what are the design standards, either accessibility standards or other design standards or criteria that you're using to determine why this feature that you're trying to add is going to increase the accessibility of your site. So if it's something like interpretive elements that you're adding, maybe you're putting in some waysides with audio description, this is where you can also explain what are you using to determine or to design and plan out your audio description. Are you following guidance that maybe has been issued by the National Park Service or the Smithsonian or some other organization that's done a lot of work in the outdoor interpretation and accessibility realm? So please include any of that information here. And the last bullet on the screen for this question, and then for some of the later questions, we ask you please describe how these things fit in with all the elements of your project. What we don't want is kind of sugarcoating the accessibility improvement features of your project and kind of hiding the things that may not quite meet the standards. We want to know what the total picture of your project is. It doesn't necessarily, it's going to make you look any worse in terms of scoring. There's actually some scoring in there to make sure folks are listing the whole project. We want to understand the whole picture of what's going on with this project and how this improvement is going to go in. All right, the next item we ask you to, so this is a place where we ask for an attachment. 19, attach any plans or specifications, cut sheets of, if it's an item you're purchasing or you have a design, please, whatever you have existing at this time, please attach that. If you're still kind of selecting a product to go in, attaching what you're looking at is helpful for us, and we can review that and make sure it meets at least the minimum standards that are required. And we will ask for more detailed plans or spec sheets as for the folks that are moving forward. So before in the process of doing the grant agreement and in the early months of the grant, we will request the final versions of these to review before it goes in as well. Question 20, entry to exit experience. So this is going back to that earlier question when we asked you to describe the trail amenities. So this is kind of bringing that around to describe those trail amenities in the context of a visitor experience. So we want to understand what else a visitor is going to interact with in addition to this funded element. In the application, we have an example of if you are if this project is to add benches and rest areas along a land trail, then we want to know what is it a trail that you drive to, so everybody drives and they park here. What's the parking lot like? Are there like trail information signs there? Is there a restroom? To understand how this project fits in with the whole experience, because these accessibility improvements you're doing don't live in a vacuum. Folks who are using your trails are not just only going to this one element that you're going to put in. It's about a whole total complete accessible experience and being able to share that opportunity and experience with folks that they may be coming to the trail with. All right, the next section, section E, we're working our way through here, installation, maintenance, and upkeep. Here's we asked for another attachment, and this is just a simple map of where the funded element is. I know you're providing the latitude and longitude, but this is just to keep our application packages complete and kind of standalone. So we'll use that to understand where the element is. That can be something very similar. I guess I'm not sponsored by Google. However, I've listed them on my slide. Whatever your favorite mapping software platform is, please use that, drop a pin, show us where it is. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Question 22, we're asking for information on how the item will be installed or constructed. There's a lot of kind of sub questions in here, but the point of this question is basically like, show us that your entity is prepared and capable of doing this work. We're assuming that many of the projects that you're going to submit are going to be kind of for buying something that you may, that your staff may install themselves. So we just need to understand how that process is going to work and what planning has been done and what your entity's experience is on that. And that's similarly to the next item, question 23 on maintenance and upkeep. There's a couple sub questions there, and we just want to understand how this funded element is going to remain usable for folks throughout its usable lifespan. All right, our second to last section, section F, commitment to inclusion. I'm going to call out again that this is another highly scored item because we want to really understand how this project fits in with your entity's overall plans for making more equitable experiences for folks with disabilities and all people on your trails. So the question specifically asks to describe commitment, achievements to date, and long-term plans. And just know that those items are all going to be scored separately. So maybe this is your first accessible initiative and project, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're not going to receive a good amount of points in this category, because having the commitment and long-term plans to be able to do it is definitely just as important. And perhaps you haven't had the funds to do it up to this point, and that's why you're applying to this grant. So certainly each item is scored separately, so you can answer them kind of separately, and it'll be looked at in that way. In the last section, the certification statement. So I just called out a couple pieces of the statement. We're asking for whoever your person with signatory rights for your entity to sign off on knowing that this environmental review and permitting will be required on the project, as Crystal discussed, that you will have to pass the inspection before you'll be reimbursed. So we just have that all included there on that last page. And as we already discussed, we will be taking all the submissions via email this year by the deadline. In the manual, we do discuss there's a file size. So the maximum file size is 25 megabytes. If for some reason we don't have a lot of attachments here, so I don't expect many folks will exceed that. But if you think your file will exceed that, you can reach out to us. We have some other options for large file transfers, but you can do that as if it applies to your situation. I don't expect it to apply to many of you all. All right, and one slide here on evaluation and scoring. I've kind of been discussing that as we go, what some of the scoring criteria were, but as we discussed, so these applications will be reviewed by our rec grants team, Crystal and myself, to make sure they're eligible and complete when they come in, and then they'll be reviewed and scored by a panel of 3 to 5 DCR staff. If you're interested in the scoring criteria, they are posted that's the last page of that manual. There's a general scoring criteria with how many points there are per category, and then some of the considerations within each of those categories. All right, so now we made it to the, oh, I skipped this slide, that's okay. All right, yeah, there we go. sorry, technical difficulties there. Now we'll take a break, and before we have a brief summary wrap up and talk about some of our other grant opportunities, see if there's any questions on the application and evaluation process, or or the program as a whole, because we're almost finished with that portion of our presentation today.
Thank you, Kelly. You're welcome to put anything in the chat. I didn't see anything come up during your discussion of the application. We can go ahead and ask people to unmute if you want to ask a question that way. All right, must be pretty straightforward. All right, who's the best person to reach out to discuss specifics of our project? So both Kelly and I are the Recreation Grants team currently. You could send an email to recreationgrants@dcr.virginia.gov, or at the end here, the last slide, we will have our direct phone numbers as well. You can reach out to either of us.
All right, we just have one slide here before we talk about some of our other grant opportunities. Just wanted to call out again that the applications are due June 30th. It's at 4 p.m. via email. We're going to list on the last slide for you to write that down again. It is posted on our website and in the manual as well. We'll reach out to folks who are recommended for funding in August. In addition, we'll also let folks know if you were not selected for funding after we reach out to those folks who were and confirm their intent to proceed. The agreements will be 12 months. Any exceptions to that would definitely be taken on a case-by-case basis, but we'd be looking at 12 months. So most likely the project period of October of this year through September of next year. That would allow, both if you're able to build in winter or also next summer's construction season. And also just leave a note here that we're very excited to hear about your potential projects for some things to go in the ground and get built or on the water, and more folks to be able to experience and enjoy your trails. So with that, I will turn it over to Crystal again for a little slide here at the end.
Thank you. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to tell you all about some other grant opportunities. So the Recreational Trails Program, some of you may have logged on yesterday. We had a webinar about that. It is also open right now and closes June 30th. So this is an 80-20 match reimbursement program for building and rehabilitating non-motorized, motorized, and multi-use trails and trail facilities amenities. So please do consider that and decide between these two, what may be the best opportunity. So the recording of that webinar will be posted to the website. We also manage the Land and Water Conservation Fund stateside and local assistance, and we are planning to open a grant round this fall. This grant round, we're quite excited, will not be just for acquisition, it will also be for development projects. This is a 50-50 match reimbursement grant as well, which is from the National Park Service. And do consider that, this is for public outdoor recreation projects. So perhaps your trail plan could work under that fund. The park does have to be protected in perpetuity. So we are happy to talk more about that opportunity, and we'll be providing more outreach coming up. Additionally, the Virginia Land Conservation Fund Foundation is administered at DCR in the LandCon division, and they are planning to open the next grant round this summer. This is to fund the protection of open spaces and parklands, lands of historic or cultural significance, farmlands, forests, and natural areas. It can be either for acquisition or easement. The contact is Sue Bulbakaya and her team, and her information is listed here. And with that, thank you again for attending, and we're going to put up our contact information here, and we can take a few more minutes for any questions.